trophy were even born. Were begun in 1738, when Charles III of Bourbon ruled Naples. The National Library in Naples was once the Royal Bourbon Palace. The most precious items from the Villa of the Papyri were removed and are now housed here. This is a carbonized scroll, an ancient book, converted to charcoal by the intense heat of the pyroclastic flow. It is one of thousands of tightly rolled reed scrolls containing the writings of Roman and Greek scholars.
It's a great privilege to work on the papyri from Herculaneum. I have dreamt about it since the first time I was here 30 years ago as a young scholar.
Professor Canute Cleve heads a small team of dedicated volunteers who are determined to do the impossible. Their aim is to prise the charred scrolls apart and read them.
The first time they were found, they were believed to be charcoal for the fireplaces in the villa and thrown away.
Once the early explorers realized the papyri were books, they did try to open them, often with disastrous results. Many were sliced through, stabbed at, and torn apart. Today, opening teams are trying to undo the damage. The scrolls Cleve's team is tackling are fused solid.
The most difficult papyri were left to us. In the 1980s, there hadn't been opened papyri for about 100 years.
Cleve's team has pioneered a new technique to separate the layers of papyrus. They coat the outer layer with a gelatin and acetic acid solution. The gelatin holds each fragile layer in place, while the acid separates it from the one beneath. It's a piecemeal process, but it has enabled the papyri to be laid out and translated.
There are still 1,000 papyri to be opened, and I think it will take more than our lifetime to open them. I would describe it as listening from a voice from the grave, from the dead. The dead are somehow whispering to us in those papyri, and we strain to hear what they say.
Opening the ancient books is only the beginning. Reading them has been extremely difficult, the results patchy, but a new scientific technique might change that.
We are making the invisible visible.
Stephen Boras travels the world applying NASA technology developed to photograph stars and planets to the deciphering of ancient texts.
Here you have a collection that is burned. You have black ink on black papyri. Okay, center it, and we'll capture it. Okay, that's good. What we do is we take a digital image using a specific wavelength of light from the visible clear into the infrared. The ink will somewhere along there show up in a specific wavelength of light, and we're searching where that is. The papyri, the black or the carbonized papyri, is going to drop out because it has a different reflective characteristic.
Good.
Once we find that contrast, this is where we concentrate our imaging. And some of these last scrolls, we're finding some of the greatest response.
This is the papyrus I was telling you about.
Up to now, researchers thought that the blackened papyrus segments on this board were blank.
Okay, now that's just what you're seeing here.
Now that's what we're seeing with the unaided eye. We see a very little hint of ink in here starting to appear, but it has provided a great deal of enjoyment to see the expression of satisfaction on the scholar's part.
Astounding.
My God.
Focus again. They can read something they have long given up on and see ink there where there was no visible ink before.
See if you can get some more words out of it.
Agathon estin kata attenda. You can see that from here.
That works?
Yeah.
The wonder of their photography is there just springs to life on this screen the difference between ink and papyrus, and I can't doubt anymore.
This will change the way we read the papyri.
Really?
Totally, yes.
Oh, yeah.
These texts, like most of the papyri deciphered so far, are written in Greek.
Okay, let's focus.
Given that Herculaneum was a Roman town, that may seem bizarre. but the scrolls confirm that Greek remained the language of intellectuals well into the 1st century AD. Using NASA technology designed for space, the most complete ancient library in existence is being read for the first time in 2,000 years. Forensic science is gradually making sense of the scrolls. But until the digital archive is complete, the only way of reading Herculaneum's books involves days or years hunched over a microscope. Even so, the sensation of being the first to decipher the texts is thrilling.
These are unique. They tell us about the intellectual life of the 1st century BC, which is totally unknown to us outside them.
Most of the scrolls belong to Philodemus, poet, philosopher, and literary theorist. Philodemus was close to some of the greatest minds in ancient Rome. The writings reveal that Philodemus was a disciple of Epicurean philosophy. Epicurus was a Greek philosopher living in 300 BC. He rejected God and an afterlife and advocated the pursuit of pleasure through the avoidance of pain as a way of life. Under Philodemus's influence, Epicurean philosophy attracted a strong following.
Epicureans basically say, there's no God you need to worry about. There's only life. When you die, so that wasn't a welcome message in the 18th century. It might seem a little more relevant now.
The upper echelons of Roman society embraced Greek culture, particularly the philosophical teachings. After Philodemus's death, Epicureans still came to study the papyri, which championed the carpe diem, seize the day attitude.
We must exercise ourselves in the things which bring happiness, since if that be present, we have everything.
Epicureans valued stimulation of the mind as a route to happiness too.
Let no one be slow to seek wisdom when he is young, nor weary in the search for it when he grows old.
Herculaneum was no workaday town. Its elegant private and public buildings reflected the Epicurean belief in living life on Earth to the full. Epicurus himself saw the route to happiness as simply the absence of pain. But by the 1st century AD, the hedonistic pursuit of pleasure had become an end in itself. Herculaneum's suburban baths are spectacular, reflecting the residents' devotion to physical pleasure.
Water is one of the defining features, if you think about it, of Roman civilization. Aqueducts, baths. And baths like these were one of the great technological marvels of the Roman Empire. Coming to the baths was a really important social occasion. Everyone in the town does it. If you look around the houses, very few of them have private baths. The very rich have baths, but those too would be places where they'd invite their friends to, because bathing is a communal activity. And it's like any social activity, it's full of its rituals. You don't simply bathe. You do lots of things. It's a matter of personal choices. You go to your doctor before you go to the baths. You consult, how am I feeling? Have I got a slight fever? And he will tell you what sequence of baths to take.
What better environment in which to indulge in the liberal attitudes of the time? Graffiti confirmed that the baths were also a place for sexual gratification, evident in this poem written by Philodemus.
Demo and Thermion both slay me. One's a pro, the other still unversed in your ways. The one I can grope, the other I mustn't touch. I swear, goddess, I don't know which I want more. I say, little virgin Demo, I don't want it off the rack, but long for what's under lock and key.
Demo and Thermion were young boys. Scrolls from the villa also confirm that Epicurean teachings promoted equality between people, even advocating the abolition of slavery. At Herculaneum, slaves could work their way up to full Roman citizenship.
This is actually a classic of a smart Roman house. You come in from the door, you're into a big atrium, the tablinum, an enormous great reception area, and then out at the back here, you have a garden surrounded by columns, what's often called a peristyle, and that's really a sign of real success. And of course, what we ask is, what's the kind of guy who lives in this sort of magnificence? And he's a guy who really has made it, but he started as a slave. And the story then goes on, because just over there is the college of the smartest ex-slaves in town. Well, this is a really unusual and interesting building. It's not a private house, but it's a sort of clubhouse. They call it the Collegium Augustalium, the College of the Augustales. And if you want to know what an Augustalis is, you come over here. And the first thing, Augusto Sacrum, sacred to Augustus. It's always a surprise for us to realize that they worshipped the emperor, either the living emperor or the dead emperor, but worshipped as a god.
The members of this exclusive gentlemen's club were wealthy ex-slaves. Here they set up a shrine in honor of the only human being in mythology ever to have been promoted to a god, Hercules, the man after whom the town of Herculaneum was named.
Hercules is among the gods the human who was promoted to divine status. Hercules becomes a god as a reward for all his labors. And there couldn't be a more appropriate god for these freedmen who are slaves who have become citizens as a reward for their labors.
The suddenness of the catastrophe which struck Herculaneum has allowed its story to be told. This town was frozen in time at the very moment of its destruction. The impact of that moment on the estimated 5,000 people who lived here has never been examined. When Herculaneum was first excavated 50 years ago, no bodies were found. A gruesome discovery just a few years ago changed all that.
We've been working together for a few years on integrating the study of archaeological remains and anthropological findings so that we can understand better the effects of the eruption on objects and people.
Volcanologist Giuseppe Mastro Lorenzo and anthropologist Pier Paolo Petrone have found out that the last moments of Herculaneum were very different from that of its neighbor Pompeii. From the very moment the pyroclastic flow burst from Vesuvius's crater, Herculaneum was doomed. A study of the research shows that the avalanche had an internal temperature of 325 degrees centigrade. Traveling at 65 feet a second, the flow covered the distance of 7 miles from crater to coast in just 4 minutes. Herculaneum was consumed and preserved in seconds.
Even though they lived beneath one, people at the time had little understanding of volcanoes. To most people, it was just a mountain.
It has taken scientists until the last 20 years to fully grasp the violence and the speed of Herculaneum's destruction. Until then, the ferocity of pyroclastic flows was little understood. As no bodies were discovered in earlier excavations, it was assumed that everyone had escaped. But in 1981, scientists made a chilling discovery. Along Herculaneum's original seashore were a row of boat chambers. When they were exposed, it was found that hundreds of people had taken refuge here, spending their last moments huddled together for comfort. Crowded 30 or 40 to a chamber beneath a layer of light ash were dozens of human remains, caught at the precise moment of their death.
For the first time here, we've had the opportunity to study groups of skeletons in situ, in the exact position where they died. People were frozen exactly where they sat when they felt the full impact of the pyroclastic flow.
Studies of the remains reveal that this was a moment of horror. Petroni and Mastro Lorenzo found evidence of heat so extreme that teeth shattered. Examination of the skulls suggests that the blood inside them may have boiled. The bodies of over 300 people have been found so far. A few had reached the beach, but most people crammed into the 12 boat chambers. The position of the bodies as a group tells a powerful story. Bound in a fearful embrace, they were boiled, then smothered by a pyroclastic flow they probably didn't even see coming. Their reclining positions suggest that most were asleep. In one corner, the bones of an unborn child were found beneath those of its mother's ribcage. Most likely waiting to be evacuated by sea, their discovery has also thrown up an intriguing question.
There is a varied cross-section of people within the chambers. Adults, children, young people, women, men. But there are no old people. Very few people over 40. So, where are the other people of Herculaneum?
The absence of Herculaneum's older inhabitants is puzzling. Were the older citizens, the intellectual elders, so revered that they were first to be evacuated? We know from the dominance of the Villa of the Papyri that ancient Roman civilization prized knowledge above most things. But could even this society have revered knowledge above the lives of its young, the seeds of the future? Besides, Epicurean philosophy preached that those who had lived life to the full should greet death without fear. It might simply be that older people couldn't make it to the beach. They may have gathered elsewhere in the town. Until more bodies are found, the riddle of the missing elders will remain. Some answers surely lie in buried sections of Herculaneum, but the secrets of this magnificent town, peeled open only 50 years ago, may be lost forever. Herculaneum is crumbling. Chipped inch by inch from the rock that held them together, most of the villas are now sinking into ruin.
In the time I have known Herculaneum, it's changed absolutely dramatically in terms of sheer physical disintegration of the site. Enormous beams are just cracking and falling. Whole parts of the town are barred off with that terrifying notice that just says crolli, collapses.
Pollution, erosion, lack of money and mismanagement are all to blame for the condition of the site. Andrew Wallace Hadrill believes that before any more excavation is undertaken, the buildings that have been exposed already should be restored.
If you just come to the site, use it, dig it up, have a quick look, then let it crumble and go on and dig up the next bit. That is archaeological rape. If you expose it, you have a responsibility to look after it, and that's that responsibility that has to be faced up to. Very soon, what makes Herculaneum absolutely without compare in ancient archaeology will have gone if they don't do something to preserve it.
Yet locked beneath the buried lower floors of the Villa of the Papyri, the other half of its library is waiting to be discovered. Historians believe that a collection of scrolls written in Latin is still sealed in volcanic rock. Plays, poetry, art and philosophy, Latin scripts to complement the Greek papyri. Without these, the story of Herculaneum will never be complete. The Villa of the Papyri is now choked with weeds and surrounded by brackish water. The ravages of weather and time have taken their toll. But there is a greater danger. There may not be time to repair the villa to its full glory. Vesuvius could erupt at any time, and reclaim its most enchanting victim. Mount Vesuvius will erupt again. The only question is when. Philodemus's treatise on death and his admiration for those who embrace it could have been written for those who gamble with life by living here now.
All this anxious love of life of theirs comes only from the fear of death, and they try to push all images of it away from them. And then, when it comes too close and vivid to ignore, a strange thing happens to them. When it comes suddenly before their eyes, they, summing up with utter clarity as one sums up at the end of a long sentence, breathe their last, as calmly as if their awareness of death had never failed them for the smallest interval of time.
Vesuvius has erupted at least 100 times in the last 6,000 years. Before the 79 AD eruption, the volcano had stood dormant for nearly 700 years. No wonder people had no fear. On that day in August, a column of ash 20 miles high had been spewing out of the cone for 12 hours. The fallout rained down on Pompeii to the south, perhaps lulling the people of Herculaneum into a false sense of security. It may be that the people found in the boat sheds were those who were last to leave. If so, they paid with their lives. Today, there are elaborate evacuation plans for the entire area surrounding the volcano. But what are the chances of evacuating the 18 towns with their combined population of 700,000 in time? Pompeii is a typical example. It's just one of the densely packed towns which make up the urban sprawl between volcano and coast.
The town of Pompeii has one of the highest population densities in Europe. There are 13,000 inhabitants per square kilometre. It's a huge number.
Vincenzo Savaresi is an officer of the local civil protection force. Getting people out in time will be his responsibility, and he's worried.
This street is typical of the poor road system in the historic town centre. We have to remember that every little town in the Vesuvian region has the same problem.
The narrow streets make efficient evacuation unlikely. The poor state of most of the buildings means that many of them would collapse with the first earth tremors of an eruption, blocking escape routes. Savaresi is under no illusion as to the immensity of the task facing his civil protection force. His work is made more difficult by local attitudes. Most people ignore the risks, despite the warnings of history. In 1631, after an eruption that killed 4,000 people, blunt advice was etched on a plaque in the center of town. If you love life, do not think about material goods. Do not think about the things of value. Leave everything and run away.
An emergency plan is working when every individual knows what to do in the event of an emergency. That just isn't the case yet. This means that if there were an eruption today, we couldn't say for sure that everyone would know what to do. Most people ignore the problem.
Portice's 64,000 residents between them own 30,000 vehicles. Unless people follow an evacuation strategy, there will be chaos. Even if you were lucky enough to make it out of the town, there is a single access road feeding onto the two-lane autostrada. It's the only land route out of the entire area, and crammed full even on an ordinary day. There was no effective road access out of Herculaneum. Escape had to be by sea, and Portice's saving grace might also be its harbour. But if Vesuvius were to erupt tomorrow, thousands of evacuees from villages all over the region, trapped between volcano and sea, would flood this entire coastline. The simple fact is that the local population have no reliable means of escaping a Vesuvian eruption, by land or by sea. Little has changed in 2,000 years.